Good morning. I'm your host, Rachel Morera, Director of Community Engagement at Economic Alliance, Snohomish County. Thank you for joining us today for our coffee chat session, 2026 Legislative Wrap-Up, Key Outcomes and Regional Implications. Coffee Chats is our monthly virtual series designed to bring together business leaders, policymakers, and community partners for conversations about the issues shaping Snohomish County's economy. Today's session focuses on the recently concluded Washington State Legislative session and what the outcomes mean for our region. Each year, the legislative session brings decisions that directly impact our local economy, from transportation infrastructure and housing policy to workforce development, economic development investments, and the overall regulatory environment for businesses. As Snohomish County's state-appointed associate development organization, Economic Alliance Snohomish County actively tracks these issues and advocates for policies that strengthen our regional economy and support employers throughout the county. We're fortunate this morning to be joined by members of our Snohomish County legislative delegation who will share their perspectives on the 2026 session, what passed, what didn't, and what it means for our communities and businesses moving forward. So thank you again for all of us and all of you in the audience joining us this morning and staying engaged in the policy conversations that help shape the future of our county. And with that, let's get started. Before we begin our conversation with legislators, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Economic Alliance Snohomish County works closely with an exceptional government relations team in Olympia from Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs. Representing EASC throughout the legislative session are Diana Carlin and Catherine Holm, who help monitor legislation, advocate for the Alliance's priorities, and ensure the voice of Snohomish County businesses are represented in Olympia. We are grateful for their partnership and their work throughout the legislative session on behalf of our region. This morning's discussion will be moderated by Diana Carlin. Diana brings extensive experience in the state government and public policy. She works closely with EASC staff and our advocacy committee to advance policies that support economic growth, infrastructure investment, workforce development, and a strong business climate in Snohomish County. Diana will guide our conversation with legislators this morning. Now I'd like to introduce the members of our legislative delegation who have joined us today. I think we were still waiting on Senator Liias to join. So we will give him just a minute, but we are expecting Senator Marko Liias, who represents the 21st Legislative District, serving communities including Edmonds, Mukilteo, and portions of Everett. Senator Liias currently serves as the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee and has been a leading voice in Olympia on transportation funding, infrastructure investment, and policies that support economic mobility across Washington. We're also joined by Senator Keith Wagner, who represents the 39th Legislative District, which includes communities such as Arlington and Cedar-Woolley. Senator Wagner serves on the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, Law and Justice Committee, and Ways and Means Committee. Thank you for being here, Senator Wagner. And we're pleased to welcome Representative Sam Lowe, also representing the 39th Legislative District, including Lake Stevens and surrounding communities. Representative Lowe has a long background in local government and public service and is a strong advocate for infrastructure investment, rural communities, and policy that supports our local businesses and economic growth. Good morning, Rep. Lowe. And finally joining us this morning as well is Representative Julio Cortez, who represents the 38th Legislative District, serving Everett, Marysville, and the Tulalip Reservation. Representative Cortez serves as the Vice Chair of the Early Learning and Human Services Committee, the Technology, Economic Development, and Veterans Committee, and the Appropriations Committee. We're grateful to have each of our legislators taking time this morning to join us and share their perspectives on the legislative session. And with that, I will turn it over to Diana Carlin.
Well, thank you, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all for joining us this morning. We're grateful to have members of the Snohomish County Legislative Delegation with us today. So let's start with an opening question for all our legislators. From each of your perspectives, what were the most important outcomes of the 2025 legislative session? And let's start with Senator Wagner.
Okay, thank you, Diana. And first, I'm going to butter up the moderator and let the Snohomish Economic Development Alliance know you couldn't do better for an advocate down there. Diana does a great job. So 60-day session. So typically that is small adjustments to policy and budget. This year we went in with a very big budget problem, which is highly unusual. So getting the budget out, I think, was the heavy lift, although most of that falls on the majority party. Of course, the income tax that came out is the one that makes a lot of news. So that is substantial. I'm sure we'll get some questions on that as well. But as far as wins from my perspective, I think not having the collective bargaining rights for agricultural workers come forward was a good decision. If we ever get to collective bargaining rights for ag workers, that just needs to be worked out a lot better. Our ag right now is absolutely struggling. We got great briefs from Washington State Department of Agriculture that show Washington State's farmers are at the bottom of the nation, either 50th or 51st, depending on which day you check, in terms of profitability. And much of that has to do with labor costs, fuel costs, costs for chemicals. So that was one thing that I was glad to see at least put on hold so we can work through that issue in a long session and get more stakeholder involvement. And I guess I'll stop there. Those are kind of the highlights. I see Senator Liias is with us, so good to see you this morning, Marko.
Good morning. Long time no see.
Well, thank you, Senator Wagner, for your kind words and for your answer. I think I'll turn the question next to Senator Liias, and you might have missed it. It was, from each of your perspectives, what were the most important outcomes of the 2026 legislative session?
Yeah, I haven't heard the others, so apologies for being a little late. Technical challenges of being back at home. I would say, from my perspective as chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, we once again passed a strong bipartisan budget proposal this year to fund our transportation infrastructure. And particularly our focus has been on maintenance and preservation of our transportation systems. And that means our roads, our bridges, our ferries, and we made an historic $1.5 billion additional investment in maintenance and preservation, which I think is going to be really critical. We also have set the stage to really seriously talk about the replacement of the US 2 trestle over the interim. We've commissioned some more feasibility work on that in addition to the planning that's already being done there. So I look forward to working with this team, particularly my friend Sam Lowe, who is the assistant ranking member on the House Transportation Committee, to find a pathway forward. And of course, Julio Cortez, who we're going to press into service on the trestle as a big champion across time for that as well. Outside of transportation, I do think we tried to work to hear perspectives of the business community as we worked on various kinds of legislation. I am really excited that the sales tax on services that went into effect last year is going to roll off. I think we've heard sort of loud and clear that that's had all sorts of unintended consequences for businesses of all kinds, for nonprofits, even for public sector agencies. So I was delighted to work with my colleagues in the Senate to sort of find a pathway to expire that policy, and I'm pleased that it stayed in all the way till the end of session. So those are kind of probably the two top issues. Obviously, I serve on the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. We also took a lot of time working on AI policy and also on thinking about how we can continue to move forward on clean energy in this state. So a lot of opportunity ahead of us, whether it's the hydrogen economy or fusion and South Everett or some of the space work we're doing in Snohomish County. I think, to me, this session sort of put us on a good trajectory on creating more jobs, continue to double down on our strengths, building good infrastructure, and trying to listen to the business community as much as we could as we made important decisions.
Thank you, Senator Liias. Rep. Cortez, interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Diana, and thanks to the Economic Alliance of Snohomish County for bringing us together. These are super important conversations, so I appreciate the opportunity. But as I think Senator Wagner alluded to, for me, sitting on appropriations, the budget was kind of the big, massive undertaking that we dealt with. There was a lot of hours, a lot of weekend work that we put into making sure that we produced a balanced budget. In a short session, that was quite a bit. But I think, outside of the millionaire's tax that I know we're going to touch on a little bit later, there was a lot of really I think, great outcomes that came around affordability. And I'm thinking around House Bill 1903, which establishes a statewide low-income energy assistance program. It's something that is going to help a lot of people, especially right now as they're struggling, especially our more seasoned Washingtonians. And we also, for me, somebody that comes from the human services world, and does work with early learning, we're also making it a little easier for working families to have affordable access to childcare centers. Something that I think, really helps strengthen our workforce. We're working to make it a little easier for centers to open and operate. So, I think, this session was something that I was kind of really passionate about, finding ways to make the day-to-day lives of our Washingtonian families a little bit easier as we continue to navigate these uncertain times. But I think the budget was kind of the big lift that we worked hard on. We heard from an incredible amount of people to try and create a budget that's going to continue to serve Washington's most vulnerable communities, but at the same time continue to invest in some of our industries to ensure that we remain competitive at the national level.
Thanks, Representative Cortez. Representative Lowe, interested to hear your perspectives on the session.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. It's good to be here today. I want to thank you, Diana, for running this for us today. I enjoy working with you in Olympia. You're one of the best ones we have down there, so thank you. I agree with all the comments said so far. It's been incredible working down in Olympia. Obviously, working on transportation issues is something that I enjoy working on, and working with Senator Liias has been great. We meet before session, after session, and talk through transportation issues. What he said about the transportation is spot on. The only thing I want to add that I think was a highlight for me is repealing the aircraft tax. That's really important to our community here in Snohomish County with commercial service at Payne Field. And I know we had Brett from the airport come down and testify in our committee about why we needed to repeal the aircraft tax, and because we were losing jobs and losing aircraft out of state right away. And so that was a highlight to get that fixed. And a lot of that heavy lifting definitely falls on Senator Liias and our team in the House. In the House, we have two of us from Snohomish County on the leadership in transportation, Representative Donaghy and myself. And so we're definitely Snohomish County focused when it comes to our transportation needs. And obviously this year was a supplemental year. And so with a supplemental year, you can't get through as much stuff as you want during the long session, but just know that we did try as representatives and senators to get as much done in the short session as we do in the long session. It was definitely full steam ahead. So those are some of the highlights for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lowe. We have a couple specific questions for you, because we know that you have another commitment and we'll have to get off. Our first question has to do with housing and growth management. This session included legislation aimed at increasing housing supply, including measures allowing residential development in certain commercial and mixed-use zones. How do you see policies like this affecting growing communities in Snohomish County?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I do have my Snohomish County Council meeting at 9, so that's why I have to jump off. But that was a big discussion through the session this year, the residential and commercial buildings and kind of what that makeup is. We heard a lot from our cities and our county partners on what that mix should be. The mix is kind of a 40% mix. I don't know if that's a good mix or a bad mix, but that seems to kind of be the one that everybody could live with. When it comes to residential and commercial buildings, and specifically on that ground floor level. I think another thing that we tackled this year was allowing elevators in our buildings, smaller elevators. A lot of these apartment complexes and housing places you go into, they're 3 stories, they're all stairs. Everybody gets tired of doing the stairs. And one reason is because the cost of putting in full-scale elevators is just too costly to make it pencil out. And so now we're going to use elevators that are more like the European model, in buildings, which will definitely help get some elevators and help our senior population, especially not having to go up 3 flights or 4 flights of stairs. And then just the last part of the question, I had my rural ADU bill finally get through this year. I think the governor is planning on signing it next week. And that's really to allow more rural ADUs out in our rural areas, which is really important to the 39th district that I represent, and really helping with people who are on substandard lots, less than 5 acres, being able to get a mother-in-law house or a house for our kids that are starting out new families. So that's really exciting. And being the ranking member on housing in Olympia in the House has been incredible learning experience, but I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Our next question is on a competitive business climate. Employers across Snohomish County often raise concerns about regulatory complexity and the overall cost of doing business in Washington. From your perspective, what steps should the legislature take to ensure our state remains competitive and supportive of small and mid-sized businesses that are trying to grow and create jobs?
Well, I think from my perspective, it's been a full-on assault on small businesses from Olympia. That's my perspective. We passed this income tax this year. I did not vote for that. But I think that's really going to hurt small businesses. It's going to hurt our S Corps, our LLCs. And I think we're going to see a lot of businesses decide not to expand here or possibly leave. Last year, there was about 12 billion in new taxes that were added. And then this year, we're adding another 4 billion in new taxes, or 3.5 billion in new taxes. And I think small businesses are bearing the brunt of that. Our businesses here in Snohomish County are going to bear the brunt of that. I think I'm really concerned about what I'm seeing in Olympia. It used to be a very friendly business environment here in Olympia, or here in Washington State. People wanted to locate their businesses and their startups here. And I think with the new rules and regulations and the taxes, I think people are going to think twice about coming to Washington. So I'm very concerned. I know there's differences of opinion, even in the group here today, and I'm sure we'll hear those differences. But from my perspective, I'm really, really concerned about these new taxes.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for participating today, Representative Lowe. Really appreciate it. Our next questions are for Representative Cortez. Representative Cortez, you serve on the House Technology, Economic Development, and Veterans Committee. From your perspective, what were the most important economic development related issues the legislature addressed this year?
Yeah, good question. We did work on a few different topics to support our economic efforts. Like, we did some tourism stuff that I think is going to give us some good ROIs moving forward. But an important priority we addressed this year was ensuring Washington remains competitive in the very rapidly, evolving AI sector, while still maintaining some consumer protections. I think this tends to fly under the radar for a lot of folks. As AI is rapidly advancing, we're trying to take some steps to ensure we balance that innovation with protecting Washingtonians at all levels. So we looked at quite a bit of legislation this year around the AI sector. We passed some legislation that requires providers of certain generative AI systems to include provenance data in content created by their systems. Requires government agencies to notify consumers when they're interacting with certain AI systems. We worked on legislation that requires operators of AI companion chatbots to issue notifications and implement certain precautions. And also legislation, to just really promote transparency, responsible innovation, and ensure that we have that public trust as this technology is coming out. Again, it's advancing incredibly fast, and as government, we tend to move a little slower than these types of innovations. So we had a lot of conversations over the last year and a half around the AI systems coming up, and there's a lot of concerns around safety for children. There's a lot of concerns for safety for people's privacy and data collection. And I think it's a topic that we will continue to work on as the technology advances and it becomes, more and more prevalent in our not just like our daily lives, but also in business operations. So, from small businesses using AI to develop and operate their social media accounts or websites, or from larger businesses using AI to streamline safety in their operations. It's evolving quickly, so we need to make sure that we stay on top of it, but at the same time, invite this innovation to continue to make some of our lives a little bit easier. So I mean, I know all of us use AI to a certain degree, whether it's just on your phone, whether it's Googling something now, that's AI. So that was kind of a big piece of the work that we did in the economic development sector that I think again flies under the radar, but it will become more and more important as the technology advances.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for you, Representative Cortez. You represent a diverse district with many working families and small business owners. As you look ahead, what policies do you think are most important to expanding economic opportunity and workforce access in communities like Everett?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a big question. So, I think we need to keep investing in the workforce pathways that actually connect people to careers, right? Especially for me, having worked in the nonprofit sector with at-risk and homeless youth, young people, we need to make sure that they have clear, concise pathways to their careers. I think that means stronger partnerships between the K through 12 system, colleges, labor, and employers. Especially in high demand sectors here in our state, like manufacturing and maritime, healthcare, clean energy. I'm a big fan of apprenticeships and internships and paid training programs. I think they're critical for working families so they can earn while they learn. Second, I think for me, affordability is economic development, right? If people can't afford childcare, housing, transportation, they can't fully participate in the workforce. So expanding childcare access, supporting transit options, and increasing housing supply, especially near job centers, are essential, I think, to unlocking that economic opportunity for everyone. Another thing is, we have to continue supporting our small businesses. They are literally the backbone of Everett's economy. I'm a big fan of the big corporations. Big businesses, they employ a lot of people, but when you zoom out and see who employs the majority of Washingtonians, it's those small businesses that, employ 5, 10, 20, 50 individuals. So I think in order to support those small businesses, I'm really looking forward to working with my colleagues to see how we can simplify regulations, expand access to capital, is something I've been hearing quite a bit about, and providing technical assistance so entrepreneurs can start and scale here locally. I think we need to be a little more intentional about revitalizing our commercial corridors and supporting place-based economic development. So investments in infrastructure, like a lot of my colleagues here have been touching on, investments in downtown activations and neighborhood business districts help create more vibrant communities where businesses can thrive a little bit better.
Thanks, Representative Cortez. Now we have a couple questions for Senator Wagner. You've been a strong advocate for aviation and emergency response capabilities in Washington. As we think about wildfire response, disaster preparedness, and regional resilience, where should the state focus its efforts moving forward?
Yeah, well, thank you for the softball because this is a very bipartisan issue, and that's always more fun to talk about when we're all here together. So the state's done a really good job under the past Public Lands Commissioner, and that's been followed on by Commissioner Updegrove, of using their money to get aviation assets that will put fires out more quickly. I mean, I think we all know that if you have a stove fire, you don't wait until the whole kitchen's on fire to call the fire department. So that was a policy change that was put in motion a few years ago and has been continued. And Washington has invested money in being first in line for aviation assets that aren't, state assets. So some of the outside fire services, because all of us want to protect our forests, maybe for different reasons. We don't want to see them go up in smoke because if they go up in smoke, they don't feed our mills. They put carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the atmosphere. If it's public lands, DNR lands, we lose that money that would go to schools. So those are all important reasons that we have these new policies. Now, I had a bill that I think helps a little bit that the governor just signed on Saturday, which was bringing our Civil Air Patrol under the military department in Washington State. And not a lot of people know this, but the Civil Air Patrol is one of the largest, mini air forces in our state, and they have incredible assets, imagery. They can pick up fires with forward-looking infrared. So now all those assets will come under the military department in times of emergency. So another way that we get after wildfires and also do other things like damage assessment for flooding like we had last year. So we're going in the right direction on aviation and preserving our forests. And I wanted to get back to, I can't remember who mentioned it. I think it was Representative Lowe, the luxury aircraft tax repeal. A very important move. And what I think is important about it is when we realize we made a misstep, having the courage to say, oops, that was a bad move and go back. I really appreciate that. I think Senator Liias may have been spearheading that effort. Uh, what happened in the meantime is a lot of people sold their hangars because those aircraft left immediately. So kudos to you, Senator Liias, for seeing the problem and having the courage to say, whoops, made a mistake, U-turn. Um, we need to do that more often when we make mistakes. So I'll end it there unless there's a follow-up.
I do have a follow-up. Thank you. Many businesses in manufacturing, aviation, and logistics sectors in our region are watching state policy closely when deciding where to invest and expand. What do you believe the legislature should prioritize to maintain a business-friendly environment and keep Washington competitive for employers and job creators?
Yeah, well, I'm going to echo Rep. Lowe's comments on the I'll call it the so-called millionaires tax. So that's going to have a big effect. I have aviation manufacturing in the district, Janicki Industries. We have a lot of work going on in Arlington that's aviation based. I know for a fact that they are expanding in other states now, and we're watching this issue closely. Um, John Janicki came and presented at the Aviation Caucus. He's the president of Janicki Industries. I don't know if anyone has had a chance to go up and see the facility. It is gigantic. They do military contracting and also civil aviation on a very large scale, fuselages and things. And they're going to Utah. They've already started there. So I think we should rethink how we get a tax base. I know government seems to be rather insatiable, and we all like our projects, including me. So it's one of these games where what's going to get cut? Well, not my stuff, somebody else's, and then we end up going down this path of we need to generate more revenue. That's a discipline problem, I think, on the legislature's part, and I'll include myself in that, obviously. So that is not the way to go. I'd like to see also some refinements to the Climate Commitment Act. That's affecting everything because, as you know, we're either one, two, or three in the highest fuel prices in the nation. That is now being exacerbated by what's going on in Iran. All that high fuel cost affects everything in the manufacturing cycle, how you get raw materials, how you transport finished products. So if we could refine that, reduce it so that we don't have such an impact on everything. I started with agriculture this morning, and now we're talking about tech and manufacturing. But that high fuel cost, we have to figure out how to bring that down, or we're going to just do more and more damage to our economy. And I think we're going to see people finding other places to go do that work.
Thank you, Senator Wagner. Our next questions are for Senator Liias. Good morning, Senator Liias. As chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, you played a central role in shaping transportation policy this session. What were the biggest transportation priorities lawmakers worked to address this year?
Yeah, sorry, I stole the thunder in my opening statements, but as you heard, I think our overriding concern right now is maintenance and preservation of our transportation system. Over the course of 2025, we had a number of really high-profile bridge incidents where critical links were out of operation, and it really disrupted communities. We still have one bridge over the Carbon River down in Pierce County up to Mount Rainier that is going to be out of commission for a couple of years as we work on its replacement. And then even during session, we saw some really important overpasses on I-90 and Moses Lake have to be closed because of a lack of long-term maintenance. So we know that it's not just the potholes that folks are seeing on our highways and the sort of rough roads that are impacting us, but also critical infrastructure that's at risk. Our ferry system obviously is not immune from this. We have an aging fleet with a lot of vessels that need to be replaced, and so that's causing disruptions across time. I serve the Edmonds and Mukilteo terminals are in my district, so I get kind of every time that a boat is missing from service, I get an email, and it seems like every week it's a couple of emails where we're missing sailings because of issues with our aging fleet. So we've got to get on top of this. That's why we made that historic commitment of $1.5 billion in this supplemental year, but across the next couple of years to really have an impact. But it's not our only priority. We also are really focused on safety. Washington State, unfortunately, in 2023, reached a 30-year high in traffic fatalities on our system. And so we're working diligently to try and get that fatality count back towards zero, which is our target. And I'm pleased to report over the last 2 years, we've seen roughly 10% declines in those fatality counts. It's still too high, but at least we're sort of headed back in the right direction. And in our budget, we prioritized funding for additional state patrol training academies. The goal is to get our state patrol fully staffed within the next 2 years. So we've got more troopers on patrol, keeping our system safe. We're also investing in safer infrastructure for people. Using that preservation funding that we put in place, we're going to target some of those dollars to our most unsafe corridors so that we're both fixing potholes, but also making the system safer both at the same time. And then the other priorities in transportation touch on, the same things that people in this call care about. How do we make sure that we're leveraging our infrastructure for economic development? How do we think about the climate and environmental impacts of our infrastructure and clean air? And how can we contribute to, the vitality that makes our state so special? So there's a lot of priorities always in transportation. We also spent quite a bit of time talking about the recent flood damage across the state. And here in Snohomish County, we had over 50 square miles of our county that were underwater at the peak. My favorite / the sort of most depressing anecdote from that is there were so many roads closed that Snohomish County ran out of road closed signs. And shout out to the city of Linwood for helping loan us road closed signs because the damage and the disruption were so severe. So our budget allocated significant dollars, $45 million, to help our city and county partners get that infrastructure back up and running as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, we're seeing federal disaster money take longer and longer these days to receive. And so we wanted to make sure that our city and county partners weren't sitting around waiting for that to start the work. So we're doing some bridge loans. Well, I call them bridge loans. They're not for bridges, but they're loans to get us across this period until that federal disaster relief arrives so that we can get stuff up and running and that we don't face trade-offs at the local level. When I talked to Kelly Snyder, our public works director at Snohomish County, they could get the flood damage roads open, but then that would trade off with other really important work here at the county level. And so we want to avoid those kinds of impossible choices. So we try to be a good partner there. Those are some of the key priorities. I'm always looking for new ideas and ways that we can be making our infrastructure work even better. I saw Mayor Vanny on here for a little while. We made sure that a project up in Arlington near the new fulfillment center is staying on track. Talk to Mayor Nearing a lot about some of the critical needs in the Marysville area and the growth around the industrial sector there. Obviously, finishing 522 and US 2 are critical priorities, getting ready for light rail to arrive. There's a lot of things we need to do. Always open to hearing more ideas. And I can't end a talk about transportation in Snohomish County without a huge shout out to Community Transit, one of our critical local partners who are really making connectivity work. And every budget we have invests more into that local transit infrastructure, and this one is no exception.
Thank you, Senator Liias. I have a follow-up question for you, and I think you touched on it a little bit, but another proposal this year focused on authorizing additional bonds to preserve and complete existing highway projects facing rising construction costs. How important are these types of investments to maintain Washington's transportation system?
Yeah, it's a little bit in the weeds, but one of the ways that we fund our big infrastructure projects is by borrowing and getting the work done as quickly as possible. And I think folks look at that and say, why are we borrowing to build transportation infrastructure? Right now, we're seeing, some years 10% plus growth in construction costs on transportation projects. And our states, we have a AAA bond rating. So we can, when we borrow against the gas tax, we're getting, I think the latest bond sales were 3.99% interest rates. So when we can borrow at 3.99% and avoid those 10% year-on-year cost increases, we can be delivering projects quicker, and we can be delivering them at lower long-term costs for taxpayers. So, it's a little bit like taking out a mortgage on your home. When you got to build something big and important and that's sort of critical to your life, that's a good place to leverage that sort of low-cost debt in order to get it done. And that's what we did here. We've got some big projects underway, whether it's the 520 Portage Bay structure. If you drive through downtown Seattle, you can see them sort of adding the new flyover lanes to the express lanes to 520, or the work we're doing at Snoqualmie Pass, or the work we're doing down to replace the I-5 bridge over the Columbia River between Vancouver and Portland. These are huge, massive multi-billion-dollar investments, and those are good places to leverage our state's good credit rating to get that work done as quickly as possible and make sure that we can fund the critical maintenance and preservation. When costs go up, it usually trades off with our maintenance and preservation. So if we can contain those costs, get stuff done quicker, that means we've got more to spend on the ongoing maintenance and repair. So that is sort of one of those in the weeds decisions, but one that is critical to getting where we need to get. And I will say I was really pleased and want to give a big shout out to Senator Wagner. The vote on the bond bill in the Senate was unanimous. We worked very closely with Senator King, our ranking member from Yakima, to craft the proposal. And, it's, I think, reflective of nobody wants to necessarily borrow. Nobody wants to recognize that costs are going up, but it's a reality. And I'm proud that we built a bipartisan process to sort of take a hard look at this and do, the necessary things to make sure that our infrastructure is in good repair.
Thank you, Senator Liias. We have a couple more questions that are for all of our panelists. The first is on the millionaires tax. As everyone knows, the legislature just passed the millionaires tax at the end of session. Looking ahead, what do you expect comes next, both in terms of implementation and the broader conversation about Washington's tax structure and economic competitiveness? Senator Liias, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I think, in 2025, we faced a significant budget deficit to fund healthcare, education, the core priorities of state government. And we had to make some pretty deep cuts. We ended up cutting several $billions out of our state budget last year. And as Representative Cortez alluded to, a lot of those cuts last year came to childcare services that families are really relying on. And we had to scale back some planned expansions of affordable childcare. So we left sort of families waiting without a lot of good options out there. And so in order to balance the budget last year, we had to use our existing tax structure, which means a lot more was asked of the business community. That's why we saw that sales tax on services, B&O rates change. And I think what became clear to me and many of my colleagues was that our current tax structure really is both regressive in that it asks lower income Washingtonians to pay more of their income to taxes than higher income families, but it also relies heavily on the business community, and that is an outlier across the country. And so that was why when Senator Peterson proposed a millionaire tax that would shift the cost of state services away from working families, away from small businesses, and ask those who are paying a much lower share of their income here than in other states or other parts of the country to contribute more. It felt like something worth considering. I didn't initially sign on to the proposal because I was concerned that this was just going to be a new tax. But over the course of the process, we were able to include substantial small business tax relief. This millionaire tax now funds and pays for the largest small business tax cut in Washington state history, a dramatic expansion of the small business B&O exemption, an elimination of those sales taxes on services we saw last year. So that was part of, to me, the trade-off. Like if you're in the top 1% in this state, you're paying about 4 to 5% of your income to state and local taxes. If you're in the bottom 20%, you're paying 15% of your income to state and local taxes. Like we need to try and turn that system right side up. And at the same time, we're investing in dramatic small business tax relief as well. So we're, I think, trying to change the system from one that's like on the shoulders of folks who candidly can't afford it to something that is more affordable. And even as and I was not in the sort of weeds of drafting the proposal, but I was talking to Senator Peterson and others that were. They worked very hard, for example, to make sure if you're a pass-through entity, and when I was a small business owner, we had an S corporation, so anything that the business made at the end of the year ended up on our personal taxes. So we thought about those sort of pass-through entities and made sure that every dollar of B&O that you pay to the state is fully deductible against that $1 million threshold and that income. So that's one way for small and medium-sized businesses to make sure that we're protecting them from the unintended consequences of this. There is a flat $1 million deduction, but on top of that, you can deduct your state B&O. And so the vision of this really is to make sure that our small and medium-sized businesses aren't unduly impacted. We also need to acknowledge that 42 other states have some kind of income tax. The state of Idaho, our neighbors, that are not viewed as being necessarily the most left-leaning state, they have a 5.2% income tax rate. So if you're thinking about moving to Idaho, you need to be earning over $2 million, about $2.2 million per year in income before the Idaho tax system in terms of income tax would be competitive with what this bill would do. So we tried to think about how it's competitive. We also tried to think about the whole ecosystem. We ended the use of non-competes, for example, this year. So that's one way of helping our entrepreneurial community. So we're thinking about the push and pull of all of these things together. But ultimately, we need to move away from a system that is on the shoulders of small businesses and working people and spreads the cost of healthcare, education, these critical services, more broadly to everybody in our state.
Thank you, Senator Liias. Senator Wagner, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, I guess I'll be the counterpoint. So I did not vote for it. I think it's a very bad idea. And I would remind everybody that just 2 sessions ago, we received initiative to the legislature from the people saying that we would never have an income tax. And lots of folks voted for that. 2 years later, complete flip. Explain that to me. Perhaps strategic, but very disingenuous if I'm putting it politely. I feel like the legislature sort of betrayed the people when they voted for that, which is essentially a promise that we're not going to have an income tax. And then 2 years later, everything switches. And it's hard for me to understand because at that time, 2 years ago or 4 years ago, you couldn't find 5 votes on the other side of the aisle for that. I served on the tax structure work group for 3 years with Senator Frame, who Senator Frame, I think, is kind of the ramrod on this policy. After 3 years, what we heard from the people was we don't want an income tax. And that was what we brought back to the legislature. suddenly, so apparently that wasn't the answer that people wanted to hear in the legislature. So this tax pops up. And there's a lot of flaws to this, besides the fact that it's, in my mind, in plain English, unconstitutional. Well, let me switch gears a little bit. The question you asked was, what do you think's next? What's going to happen? The first thing that is going to happen is there'll be an initiative drive to roll it back. That's the first thing that's going to come up. The second thing is, and I think that it has to be implemented first, is there will be a challenge in the courts. Uh, I believe if the initiative gets enough signatures, the vote will be rolled back. Although that's always a gamble because an initiative, the wording confuses people. So you would be voting yes to roll it back, which feels like you're voting yes for an income tax if you don't read carefully, or no to not roll it back if you want the income tax to stay in place. So that's always kind of iffy on initiatives. So those are the things that I think will happen immediately. I was in a conversation yesterday with a farmer who said, well, I've got to leave now. I've gone from being a large farmer to paring it down. I talked about the non-profitability of farms in Washington right now. He said, I've gone from being a large farmer to selling most of my holdings due to regulation. Now I'm a small farmer, but still sometimes makes $1 million. He's leaving. He's not the first person I've talked to. And the capital flight thing, you've heard people say, well, that didn't happen in other states, or it's not going to happen here. It's already happened. Um, so actually, I don't know how we're going to measure the people who saw this coming and have re basically taken their LLCs and put them in other places. They still can live in the state for a certain number of days, but they escape the tax. That is a very real effect, in my opinion. I know it's happening already locally. Sorry, my voice is running out. So that's what I think is going to happen. I also think the court will uphold it because any court that can take capital gains and say that's not income will say this is constitutional. So I think we may lose in the courts. I don't have much faith in our Washington State Supreme Court to rule in a constitutional manner as opposed to an activist manner. And I'll end there because my voice is falling. Sorry, I got to get a drink.
Thank you, Senator Wagner. Interested in your perspective, Representative Cortez.
Thanks, Diana. Well, yeah, this was with the passage of the millionaires tax. I think, yeah, absolutely. The focus now turns to implementation, making sure that it's going to be serving all Washingtonians. I think, I truly believe that this tax is helping us right size our upside down tax code with the wealthiest paying their fair share. With, for a little bit of perspective, in the entirety of my district, the 38th legislative district, it's 87 taxpayers. Just 87 taxpayers. So, and also for reference, I think across the state, that's 20,000 households, which is less than 1% of taxpayers in the state. So, as a reminder, through this policy, no one making under $1 million in income will pay this tax. And even say you make $1,100,000, first, congratulations. That's a great income for you to have. But even then, you are paying $10 on that $100 as the first 1 million is not taxed. I originally also didn't sign on to this policy, but after having conversations with colleagues, I spoke to a number of small business owners that kind of were also worried about the policy, and then the B&O tax change also kind of changed my mind, and I see it as a great way to support our small businesses, right? Because of this tax on millionaires, the proposal more than doubles, and I think Senator Liias alluded to this. It more than doubles the B&O small business tax credit. So businesses with gross receipts under 300K will owe no B&O tax, and those up to 600K, I believe, will receive the credit starting in 2028. So I think that makes this really competitive. I think it will attract more small businesses that can continue to grow here locally. But I think, there was a lot of work put behind this policy. I think it helps to ensure new revenue is paired with meaningful relief for small businesses across the state. But it also, something that kind of really made me a supporter of this policy is it brings relief for working families, right? It creates a sales tax exemption for things like diapers and grooming supplies, right? Like soap, toothpaste, shampoo, and over-the-counter drugs, which is, the typical things that you see in a family's cart when they're shopping. So again, it's supportive of working families as well. The revenue from this is also gonna allow us to expand free school meals to all K through 12 public school students in Washington, which is an additional 272,000 kids. Now, having worked again with at-risk youth, I know that when the belly is empty, it's really, really hard to study. So this is going to have a major impact, I think, in us ensuring that our students are successful. And to reiterate again, I think Senator Liias brought this up. 42 other states tax individuals earnings over $1 million per year. I know that the momentum is building nationwide. I think that Washington State is catching up. And ultimately, I think this policy is going to be a policy that's going to really support working families, our small businesses, and make us more competitive in a lot of different sectors.
Thank you. So we have one last brief question for our three panelists. It's the same question for all of you. We can start with Senator Liias. Looking ahead to the next legislative cycle, what do you expect to be the biggest policy debates, particularly those that will affect economic growth, infrastructure, and regional competitiveness in places like Snohomish County?
That's a great question. It's always hard to predict exactly what's going to come up in a year's time, or I guess 300 days' time. But I would say affordability seems to be a persistent challenge for businesses, for families, for the whole economy. So I think we've got to continue to work on particularly healthcare affordability. We know that, unfortunately, the Trump administration has pushed through these really devastating cuts to our healthcare system. We're seeing already some of our rural and critical access hospitals at the brink. And I think we're going to see, I visited Swedish Edmonds in my district and heard how close they are to real significant solvency issues. So we've got to, I think, work on healthcare affordability, healthcare costs. Representative Cortez alluded to it earlier, but childcare costs are continuing to really, really hamper families. And we know that when families struggle with childcare costs, it also makes it harder to participate in the economy as small business owners, as workers. So we've got to address the rising costs of childcare. In our area, housing affordability is an incredible challenge. I think when we think about the millennial generation I'm a part of, the generations coming behind us, it is home ownership that really is the path into the middle class and to that generational wealth. And it is getting harder and harder. In my 21st district, Edmonds, parts of Linwood, Mukilteo, it is really hard to find an affordable home, a starter home, if you want to move back to the community you grew up in and be a part of the place that is familiar to you. So we've got to think about housing affordability. And I don't think we want our county, our state to be a place where young people can only afford to rent. We need it to be a place where people can afford to buy their first home, get on that ladder of opportunity, and get on the way up. I think the other piece we're seeing just because of the Trump tariffs and some of the other policies across the country is the impacts on trade in our state. And we're already seeing job growth slow dramatically. So I think we're going to have to be focusing on jobs as well. It's part of why that maintenance and preservation investment this year was so critical. It's a 6-year plan of additional maintenance and preservation. Our staff tell us it'll create up to 30,000 jobs doing that work statewide. I think across state government, across local government, we need to be thinking about what can we do to help create jobs in our communities because of the impacts that some of these trade disputes have had and some of the other policies that we're seeing have had. So jobs, affordability, and then, I chair the transportation committee, so it's not going to surprise anybody that we've got to continue to make really significant investments. That means things like finishing 522, rebuilding the US 2 trestle, some of these other really critical regional projects. So you can expect conversations about this over the interim as we plan for that as well.
Thank you. Senator Wagner, one thing if you could think of for the upcoming session.
So last year this time, I said the budget wasn't going to work and kind of got poo-pooed by folks on the other side of the aisle. And less than 10 months later, the budget didn't work. So we had this big problem to solve in Olympia this year. I don't think it's solved. So I think the budget's going to come back to bite us. It's not going to work out, and we'll still be talking about that next year. I think we will have to look back at our revenue sources. We're going to have to deal with what falls out from the income tax. I think we'll still be talking about that. Now, I do want to give Senator Liias in particular credit on this transportation thing. The bill this year was very disciplined. And part of the reason I know that is because my projects got told no. But we got told no across the board, and that was the kind of discipline that we needed to hear, which is why I think it's the first time I voted for the transportation budget, which may sound counterintuitive to be told no on your project, but you vote for it because it was disciplined and it made sense. I hope that going forward in the next session, we make more decisions like that. Because I think what we have trouble with in the legislature is nobody wants to say no to anything. And when we get told no about our own projects, we're kind of indignant. We want to have somebody else's project canceled. We have to be more self-reflective in the future because the operating budget just continues to grow and grow because we can't say no. I think we're going to be back next year this time with the same problem we started with this year, a budget that's in deficit. I'd love to be wrong, but that's what I really think.
Thank you, Senator Wagner. Representative Cortez, one prediction for next session.
Yeah, it's we definitely deal with a lot of different topics for sure. So one prediction is very difficult, but I think affordability, specifically around housing supplies, is going to continue to be a pretty big topic as our population grows, especially here in Snohomish County. We've done a lot for our housing supply, but that work definitely needs to continue so we can figure out a good balance between affordability, protection of our environment as we build, but also keep it as simple as possible to build more housing and a variety of different types of housing, right? We can't just continue to build single family homes. We need to build up. I think that's something that's going to be more and more important as our state and county population grows. Workforce development will be another topic as AI moves along, and supporting key industries like aerospace, clean energy will be important. But here for Snohomish County, I think, finding that balance between economic growth and affordability and ensuring we're making strategic investments right here at home is going to be pretty critical. So I'm looking forward definitely to continuing this work, but it'll be important to focus on all those things.
Thank you. And back to Rachel.
Thank you all. Thank you, Diana. Thank you to Senator Liias, Senator Wagner, Representative Cortez, and Representative Lowe, who unfortunately had to drop off a little early, but we thank him for his role in the Snohomish County Council as well. So just a couple quick plugs before we let you go. We do have our annual meeting, Economic Forecast and Snohomish County Awards event coming up on April 14th. We also have our next coffee chat, which will be covering a community-wide climate resiliency plan from Snohomish County. So they plan to present that ahead of the provide feedback during the public comment period. And then if you would like more information on any of our upcoming events, we just encourage you to please go to our website at economicalliancesc.org. There is a QR code on your screen. We'll also send you a follow-up email after today's presentation. And we will cover some resources from today's discussion and share those upcoming events with you as well. So thank you all again for your participation, and we will see you during the next coffee chats.